Most people, if you ask them who suffered the most in Harry Potter, will say Voldemort. Or maybe Snape. And look, those are reasonable answers. Voldemort mutilated his own soul 7 times. Snape watched the woman he loved die because of information he personally delivered to her killer. Those are dark. But I'd like to throw my hat into the ring and say the darkest moment in this entire series doesn't belong to a villain at all. It belongs to the man everyone trusted to have a plan. We'll get there. But first, we're ranking every major character's single worst moment, from the ones that barely register to the ones that genuinely broke them. I promise by the end of it, you'll be looking at someone you trusted very differently. Let's go. 17. Luna Lovegood. Luna was 9 years old when she watched her mother die. An experimental spell. Gone. Just like that. What keeps Luna this low isn't that the loss was small. It was enormous. It shaped every single thing about her. The thestrals, the composure, the genuine comfort she offered Harry after Sirius died. Because she understood loss in a way none of the others did. But Luna found a way to carry it that didn't break her. She believed she would see her mother again. Whether you find that comforting or heartbreaking, probably says something about you. 16. Arthur Weasley. Nagini nearly killed him in the Department of Mysteries. The venom dissolved every magical attempt to close the wounds. He survived, but only because Harry woke screaming from inside the snake's perspective, and that warning reached Dumbledore in time. Rowling has since confirmed she originally planned to kill Arthur in that scene. She spared him because, in her words, there were almost no good fathers in these books, and Arthur was the only one who fully qualified. His survival cost Lupin and Tonks their lives instead, which is its own kind of darkness. Arthur himself would carry that knowledge. 15. Molly Weasley. In Order of the Phoenix, Molly encounters a boggart in Grimmauld Place. It shows her every family member dead, one after another. She can't dispel it. She just stands there, crying, as it cycles through her children. Fred's death made that vision real. She'd lost her brothers Fabian and Gideon in the First War. She knew exactly what loss looked like. And then she had to watch her son die mid-laugh while his twin brother held the body. The reason Molly sits at 15 rather than higher is that her grief found an outlet. Not my daughter, you bitch! She channeled it. That rage, that active love, it saved Ginny's life. Molly's darkest moment didn't leave her paralyzed. It left her dangerous. 14. Hagrid. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort forced a bound, weeping Hagrid to carry Harry's apparently dead body back to the castle as a trophy. This is the moment that bookends the entire series. In the very first chapter of Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid carried baby Harry to Privet Drive. In the final act of Deathly Hallows, he carried him again, this time believing the boy was dead. Rowling planned that symmetry from the start. Hagrid, who lost his mother at 3, his father at 12, was expelled at 13, had his wand snapped, spent a lifetime being underestimated, and then had to carry the only person who'd ever looked up to him, limp and cold, through a jeering crowd. 13. Lucius Malfoy. Lucius Malfoy spent his entire life building something. Status, influence, a dynasty. The Malfoy name, which translates from Old French as bad faith, in case you needed the series to be less subtle, was supposed to mean power. By the end, Voldemort was sitting in his dining room, using his home as a headquarters, confiscating his wand at the dinner table in front of every Death Eater he'd ever outranked. And his teenage son had been assigned a mission designed to kill him as punishment for Lucius's failures. His ideology had eaten his family alive and left him wandless, unshaven, and irrelevant in his own manner. That's a specific kind of devastation. The architecture of your entire life collapsing. 12. Narcissa Malfoy. Narcissa's worst moment is arguably her bravest. She defied Voldemort's explicit orders, traveled to Spinner's End, and begged Severus Snape, on her knees, weeping, for an unbreakable vow to protect her son. Her own sister stood beside her and offered nothing, just cold ideological approval of whatever Voldemort had decided. The thing about Narcissa is that she was never particularly good. She believed in blood purity. She enabled everything, but her love for Draco was absolutely unconditional. And watching her realize that the world she'd helped build was now being pointed directly at her son, that's a specific kind of reckoning. She lied to Voldemort's face in the Forbidden Forest. He asked if Harry was dead. She said yes. She did it to get back inside the castle and find Draco. That's her whole story in one moment. 11. Peter Pettigrew. Peter Pettigrew is the only character on this list who chose his darkness, understood it was wrong, and did it anyway. For a year before Halloween 1981, he fed information to Voldemort. He gave up the Potter's location within days of being made their secret keeper. Then, he killed 12 innocent muggles with a single curse, cut off his own finger, and spent 12 years living as a rat in a child's bedroom, rather than face what he'd done. His defense, when cornered, "I was scared. He had weapons you can't imagine." That's not a villain's speech. That's a coward's confession. And cowardice, in this series, is treated as its own form of moral failure, almost more unforgivable than malice. Because Pettigrew knew better and chose wrong anyway. His silver hand eventually strangled him the moment he showed a flicker of mercy toward Harry. Voldemort had built the punishment directly into the gift. That's poetic in the worst possible way. 10. Ron Weasley. Ron's worst moment isn't leaving. It's coming back. After weeks of the Locket Horcrux amplifying every insecurity he'd suppressed since age 11, always second, always overshadowed, always the one nobody wrote home about, Ron abandons Harry and Hermione in a moment of rage and walks into the dark. When he returns and saves Harry from drowning, he has to destroy the locket. And the Horcrux, with surgical precision, shows him exactly what it found when it went looking for something to use. A vision of Harry and Hermione, intertwined, whispering, least loved, always, eternally overshadowed. Ron drives the sword through it. Rowling called this the moment Ron finally becomes an adult. Not because he destroyed a Horcrux, because he looked directly at his worst fear, that he doesn't matter, and killed it anyway. 9. Hermione Granger. Before the Horcrux hunt even began, Hermione stood in her parents' house and modified their memories, erased herself from their lives, sent them to Australia under false names with no knowledge they had a daughter. She did it alone. She didn't tell Harry or Ron until later. She just did it, because it needed doing. Then, at Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix subjected her to the Cruciatus Curse for information about the Sword of Gryffindor. Ron was locked in the cellar below, listening. Hermione maintained the lie through all of it, that the sword was fake, that they hadn't broken into Gringotts. Her intellect holding even while her body couldn't. The reason Hermione doesn't rank higher is the same reason she doesn't break. She made a choice, and she stood behind it. 8. Draco Malfoy. There's a scene that almost nobody talks about because it happens before the climax. Harry follows a sound and finds Draco Malfoy alone in a bathroom, crying, talking to a ghost, moaning Myrtle, because there is genuinely no one else. I have to do it. He'll kill me. He'll kill my whole family. Draco spent his 6th year carrying an impossible assignment: assassinate Albus Dumbledore, knowing it was designed to kill him if he failed, and possibly if he succeeded. He tried to fix a vanishing cabinet for months. He aged visibly. He lost weight. When he finally had Dumbledore wandless and helpless on the astronomy tower, his hand trembled and lowered. He couldn't do it. Rowling's Pottermore essay notes that Draco's wand core is unicorn hair, symbolic of the unextinguished good at the heart of Draco Malfoy. He was handed an ideology at birth, spent his adolescence discovering it was poison, and had no way out. That's not a villain's story. That's a tragedy. 7. Sirius Black. Sirius convinced the Potters to switch secret keepers. It was his idea. His certainty that Pettigrew would never be suspected. His confidence, born from 12 years of friendship, that he knew exactly who his friends were. He was wrong about one of them, and that mistake cost James and Lily their lives. Then, without trial, Barty Crouch Sr. didn't bother, Sirius spent 12 years in Azkaban, surrounded by Dementors. The only thing that kept him sane was that his knowledge of his own innocence was not a happy thought. Dementors feed on happiness. Rage and obsession, they leave alone. Rowling has stated Sirius never fully recovered. When he finally escaped and found a kind of fragile life at Grimmauld Place, it was taken from him almost immediately. He fell through the veil 2 years after getting out. 12 years in a cell, 2 years of half freedom, then nothing. 6. Neville Longbottom. Harry's parents are dead. That's devastating. But the grief has a shape. There are graves. There are stories. There's a fixed, comprehensible loss. Neville's parents are alive. Frank and Alice Longbottom were celebrated R's. After Voldemort's fall, Bellatrix and 3 others tortured them with the Cruciatus Curse until both were driven permanently, irreversibly insane. They've been in the Janus Ficky ward at St. Mungo's ever since. His mother, Alice, doesn't recognize him. She sometimes shuffles over and presses a Drubel's Best blowing gum wrapper into his hand. His grandmother tells him to throw it away. He pockets it every time. Sirius Black told Harry that some fates are worse than death. He meant this. Neville has spent his entire life grieving people who are still breathing. There is no closure, no grave to visit, just the ward, the wrapper, and the walk home. 5. Remus Lupin. Remus Lupin was bitten by Fenrir Greyback at age 4. Through no fault of his own, he became something the wizarding world despised. He spent his entire adult life losing jobs, losing relationships, watching doors close, not because of anything he did, but because of what he was. And then, Tonks loved him anyway, and it destroyed him. He arrived at Grimmauld Place and tried to abandon her, his pregnant wife. He stood in front of Harry and said he was leaving because his child would be a monster, because Tonks deserved better, because he had made her an outcast and would only make everything worse. Harry called him a coward. Remus attacked him, smashing him into a wall, then stormed out. He came back. But the fact that he nearly didn't, that a man of that much quiet courage could be so thoroughly hollowed out by self-loathing that he was prepared to leave his unborn child, that's the real measure of what 40 years of stigma does to a person. 4. Harry Potter. In the final act of Deathly Hallows, Harry learns the truth. He has to die. Not in battle, not by fighting back. He has to walk, unarmed, into the Forbidden Forest, stand in front of Voldemort, and let it happen. No plan, no last move, just acceptance. He uses the Resurrection Stone to summon his parents, Sirius and Lupin. He asks Sirius, "Does it hurt? Dying?" And Sirius says it's quicker than falling asleep. Then he pockets the stone, walks past the dead and dying without stopping. Doesn't say goodbye to Ron or Hermione, because he knows he won't be able to do it if he does. He was 17 years old. Rowling called this chapter her favorite in the entire series. She said it required a different kind of bravery than anything else Harry faced. Not the courage to fight, but the courage to stop, to surrender completely, to choose death not in a moment of heat, but in cold, clear-eyed, deliberate silence. That kind of darkness doesn't announce itself. 3. McGonagall. This one lives in Pottermore, not the books, which is exactly why most people have never felt the full weight of it. The summer after leaving Hogwarts, Minerva McGonagall fell in love with a Muggle farmer's son named Dougal McGregor. He proposed. She said yes. She lay awake that night and realized she would have to spend her life exactly as her mother had, hiding her magic, suppressing who she was, watching herself disappear. She had watched her mother weep when Minerva's Hogwarts letter arrived, not just out of pride, out of envy. Her mother had loved a man and paid for it in silence for decades. The next morning, without telling Dougal why, Minerva ended the engagement and left. She later married someone else. He died 3 years later from a venomous tentacular bite. She never married again, and she never entirely stopped wondering. Here's what makes this hit differently from almost everything else on this list. Most of these characters had their darkness done to them. McGonagall chose hers. Voluntarily, lucidly, in full knowledge of what she was giving up. She decided that being herself fully was worth more than being loved completely. And she carried that trade quietly, alone, for the rest of her life. The composure you always admired? Well, now you know what it cost. 2. Dumbledore. Now, here's where I want to return to what I said at the start. Most people expect the top of this list to belong to a villain, but I'd argue Albus Dumbledore's darkness is more disturbing than any Death Eater's, precisely because of the gap between who he was and what he did. At 17, Dumbledore met Grindelwald. Brilliant, magnetic, visionary. They spent a summer building a philosophy together. Wizards ruling over muggles, quote, for the greater good. And Dumbledore, already one of the most gifted wizards alive, let himself believe in it. Not because he was evil, because he was dazzled, because he wanted to be. He neglected his sister Ariana, an obscurial, her magic turned inward and violent after a traumatic attack at age 6, in favor of ideological excitement with a dark wizard. When his brother Aberforth confronted them, a three-way duel broke out. Ariana, trying to intervene, was killed. Nobody ever knew whose curse struck her. For the next 60 years, Dumbledore became the wizarding world's moral compass, the man with a plan, the one everyone trusted, and underneath all of it, the wise words, the knowing half-smiles, the careful orchestration of Harry's entire life was a 17-year-old boy who got his sister killed because he wanted something badly enough to stop paying attention to what mattered. When he found the Gaunt Ring, the Resurrection Stone hidden inside it, he put it on immediately, without thinking, without checking for curses. Dumbledore, the most brilliant defensive mind in the world, activated a cursed Horcrux because for one irrational moment, he thought he was able to see Ariana again. I was not afraid of death, but I was afraid of her forgiveness. That moment of weakness cost him his life. And it tells you everything about what he had been living with. 1. Severus Snape overheard half a prophecy, delivered it to Voldemort, and asked, specifically, explicitly, that Lily Evans be spared. She wasn't. In Dumbledore's office, after it happened, Snape made a sound described as, quote, a wounded animal. He looked like a man who had lived 100 years of misery. He whispered, I thought you were going to keep her safe. And Dumbledore, cold, deliberate, surgical, said, the Potters put their faith in the wrong person, rather like you, Severus. This is the one thing about Snape that I think gets lost in the hero or villain debate. He wasn't redeemed. He wasn't forgiven. He spent 17 years doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. Protecting Harry not because Harry mattered, but because Harry had Lily's eyes. And he died in a boathouse alone, bitten by a snake on Voldemort's assumption that it would transfer wand allegiance. He didn't get a moment. He got a floor covered in his own blood, and a boy he'd treated cruelly for 6 years kneeling beside him with a flask. He pressed his memories into that flask and died. When Dumbledore asks him, years earlier, whether his love for Lily had survived all this time, Snape doesn't answer in words. He casts his Patronus, a silver doe, Lily's form, burning in the dark. After all this time, always. That single word is the most devastating thing in 7 books. Not because it's romantic, because it means every year of suffering, every act of cruelty, every calculated coldness, all of it was the same wound, never closed, carrying the same name. He caused her death. He spent the rest of his life paying for it in private. Nobody knew. Nobody thanked him. And when Harry finally understood, Snape had already been dead for hours. That's the darkest moment in Harry Potter. Not a battle, not a curse. A man who loved someone, destroyed them, and built an entire secret life out of the wreckage, right up until the moment it killed him. What's interesting, and I think this is what makes these books hit different from most fantasy, is that the darkness isn't distributed the way you'd expect. The villains, by and large, don't suffer. Bellatrix felt nothing. Umbridge felt nothing. Even Voldemort, by the end, had mutilated himself into something incapable of real pain. The suffering belongs almost entirely to the good ones, or the ones trying to be. Now, if you want to see the families behind all these moments, check out our video, Every Harry Potter Family Tree Explained.